Hello, I'm Nicola from Hands Across the Sea Samplers, and this is a very special video for us today because I'm joined by Jackie, who is one of our model stitchers and a very important part of Team Hats.
Hello.
Jackie actually lives the other side of the country to me, so it's a very special treat for Jackie to be with me today. Jackie's actually on holiday in Cornwall, and she's brought the model of Louisa with her on holiday so that we can share her with you. So this is Louisa Coulimore, which is a Bristol Orphanage sampler. I had actually been looking for a Bristol Orphanage sampler for quite some time, but I just couldn't find the right one. It was a wet Sunday afternoon when I was confined to quarters, and I was using that time to browse the internet. And there was Louisa on the auction site. The moment I saw her, she just called to me. I went onto Ancestry and I ran her name through the search records, and I could see her living with her aunt. The fact that she was living with her aunt made me wonder if she was an orphan. Unfortunately, her age was wrong to actually be in the orphanage when the census returns were carried out. So I had to wait until the Monday morning where I could get verification from the Mueller organisation that she had actually been in the Bristol Orphanage. They confirmed that both her and her sister Alice had in fact been orphans. So that was it. Alice and Louisa were in my heart, and Louisa just had to come home to me. When she arrived after the auction, the moment I unpacked her, I just couldn't wait to sit down and chart her, and I worked hours on end until she was finished. I think I hardly saw my bed, and it just worked out perfect timing for Jackie. Jackie had very kindly agreed to start model stitching for us, and we were just waiting for the right sampler that spoke to you as well, wasn't it? Yeah. And I showed Louisa to Jackie, and over to you from there.
Yeah, I'd never seen one before, a Bristol's Orphanage sampler, and the colour, all one colour for a start, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. I looked closely at the letters, and everyone is stitched differently, very slightly, and I thought, the little quirky motifs, and I absolutely loved the look of it. It wasn't until Nicola told me a bit about the history that I was literally grabbed, and I couldn't wait to stitch her.
Yeah, it's a funny thing about the orphans. They didn't have parents to love them and to look after them, yet there are such good records on the orphans that in fact, there's more information available on them than, say, a little girl that lived all her life with her parents and got married and had lots of children. We were very lucky that the orphanage kept such good records. And in Louisa's chart, we share those records with you. There are 4 pages that show the history of the Bristol Orphanage, and we've actually included a lot of the original correspondence that the orphanage had on Louisa and Alice. So there's a little bit of an extra thing in the chart for you to enjoy and to realise what it was like being in an orphanage. I think that George Mueller was a very good man. It wasn't like living in a workhouse or a home for foundlings. These children, they had a very good education, and he really went to great lengths to make sure that they had employment to go to, and the orphanage also followed up on their well-being.
Lifelong skills.
Yes, absolutely, very much so. I've put together a little video presentation about Louisa, and you might enjoy knowing more about her story. Louisa's sampler was previously in the collection of a great collector of antiques, Ellery Yale Wood, an American who moved to England in the 1950s, and her partner Eric Golding, a renowned London book dealer. Samplers worked within the Mueller Orphanage are highly sought after by collectors, and it is said that a collection of antique samplers, or a stitcher's sampler wall, is not complete without at least one example. The samplers acted as a reference to the girls' needlework skills in the marking of linen and household items, when many of the girls found employment as domestic servants. Bristol Orphanage samplers are particularly important as the orphanage kept meticulous records of each child, casting light onto the poverty and desperate social conditions that existed throughout Britain in the 19th century. Today, these records give us the opportunity to share Louisa's story with you. George Mueller, an independent minister, and his wife began their work with the orphans in 1836 when they took 30 girls into their own home in Bristol. At this time, there were very few orphanages in the country, and orphans tended to go to homes for foundlings or the workhouse, which was akin to slave labour. At this time, a cholera epidemic swept through Bristol, leaving many children orphaned. Money was raised through charitable donations to purchase and build an orphanage at Ashley Downs. 118 orphans moved into the purpose-built home in 1849, and by 1870 there were 5 houses on the site where 2,050 children were cared for. Louisa was born on July 4th, 1861, in Weymouth, Dorset, the daughter of William Coulimore, a shoemaker, and Louisa Beard. Her mother died in 1867 of typhoid fever, which was rife, particularly in Victorian industrial cities, due to infected water. Louisa, one of her 2 brothers, and 2 younger sisters, Alice and Matilda, were given into the care of their aunt, Jane Chivers, a laundress living in Melksham, Wiltshire. Her father moved to Brackley in Northamptonshire, presumably to find work. William did not remarry and died in 1874, and only 11 days later, the children's grandfather wrote to the Mueller orphanage asking for 4 of the children to be admitted. Matilda, the youngest child, was not mentioned and remained in her aunt's care.
July the 29th, 1874. Mr. Mueller, Sir, I have taken the liberty of writing to ask if you have a vacancy for 4 children in your orphanage, their father and mother being both dead and their relatives not being able to maintain them. 2 boys aged 10 and 7 years and 2 girls aged 13 and 11 years respectively. I remain, sir, yours respectfully, William Coulimore.
Only children who had been born in wedlock, were bereft of both parents through death and were destitute would be considered for admission. The grandfather had to provide proof of the parents' marriage and death, and that the children were being supported by parish relief. The orphanage's records list Louisa's 5 aunts and 2 uncles, none of whom were able to take in the 4 children. A letter of reference describes Louisa.
Dear Sir, Louisa Coulimore is a thoroughly honest, good girl. Her aunt with whom she has been living has been careful to teach her rightly. She is tractable and willing and was kept at school until she was 12. If anything more is needed, she will gladly answer any questions.
Before the children were admitted, they had to be certified as being free from any infection. Only Louisa and Alice were granted places, and they were admitted to number 1 house on August 21st, 1874. Orphan numbers 4,313 and 4,314. Regrettably, there were no places for the brothers in the orphanage. The boys were separated from one another, with one going to an uncle and the other disappearing from record. At the orphanage, the sisters would have been fed a diet that by today's standards is considered inadequate and monotonous, however, by the standards of the day was nutritious. Louisa and Alice would have worn long green and blue plaid cloaks in cold weather, and a shepherd's plaid shawl in warm weather. Their summer walking out dresses were dull lilac cotton with a small cape or tippet. A straw bonnet was worn all year, to which was attached a green and white check ribbon for tying the bonnet on. Everyday wear was provided for by navy cotton dresses with white polka dots. Girls up to the age of 14 wore blue gingham pinafores indoors. After this, they added aprons and were promoted to house girls. They were allowed to grow their hair, which had been cropped short when they were admitted to the orphanage. As part of their domestic training, they made their own clothes. Each house contained its own schoolrooms, and Mueller employed a number of teachers amongst his staff. The children were instructed in scripture, reading, writing, arithmetic, English grammar, history, geography, Swedish drill and singing. The girls were taught sewing and all the children learnt how to knit. Mueller even employed a schools inspector to maintain high standards. He secured apprenticeships, professional training and domestic positions for the children old enough to leave the orphanage. The children would have risen, washed and dressed at 6 o'clock, with the older children helping the young and making beds. The girls would knit until 8 when they had their breakfast. At 8:30 they attended morning service with lessons between 9 and noon. 30 minutes of playtime was allowed before lunch at 1, then afternoon lessons between 2 and 4, followed by playtime. Evening service was at 5:30 with tea at 6. Girls were then expected to do useful work until they went to bed. At the age of 14, girls moved from the classroom to spend their final 3 years in what was effectively a domestic science school. They helped with the cleaning, cooking, laundering, dressmaking and parlour-maid duties, while others helped in the nursery and infirmary. The girls were paid 6 pennies a week, of which 3 pennies were banked on their behalf, to build up a cash sum which was given to them when they left the orphanage. On leaving, each child was given a complete outfit, a tin trunk, 2 changes of clothing, an umbrella, a Bible, a copy of George Mueller's narratives, a train ticket and their accumulated savings. Louisa remained at the orphanage until she was 16.
Louisa Coulimore admitted under number 4313 on the 21st August 1874, born 4th July 1861 at Weymouth, sent on 6th August 1877 to her aunt, Mrs. Jane Shivers, Seventon Lane, Magsham, as she could not be recommended for a situation, her health being very poor and her weakness such that she gets faint and exhausted at work. A believer.
Alice left the orphanage at 18 years of age in 1880 to become a pupil teacher under George Brinkworth, a believer at Stroud School. Once qualified, she returned to the orphanage where she taught the orphans for the rest of her working life. She never married and died childless, aged 86. George Mueller died a poor man in 1898. All his income had been used to provide for the orphans in his care. At his funeral, over 100 carriages followed his hearse, and thousands of people lined the route to the cemetery. During his lifetime, he had cared for 10,024 orphans and has established 117 schools which offered a Christian education to over 120,000 children. He did all of this by seeking means from God through prayer. But what happened to Louisa? Some 9 years after she left the orphanage due to ill health, we find her in 1886 in Eastbourne, Sussex, marrying William Humphreys. The census records through the following decades show that she was a self-employed dressmaker. She had put to good use the skills learned at the orphanage while stitching rows of alphabets, border patterns, numerals, and small pictorial motifs on her small piece of cotton ground. Louisa and William had 2 children who died in early infancy. Despite her ill health as a young girl, she lived to 79 years of age, dying in 1940. William died 1 year later. Louisa's needlework is her legacy. When you are stitching her sampler, please say a prayer for Louisa and Alice.
When I heard Louisa's story, I couldn't actually wait to get hold of her. Nicola told me a lot about the background of her life, how she grew up and what happened to her, and I was really touched. So when I received everything to stitch her, the emotion that I felt, I really wanted to stitch her, and when I started to stitch her, I couldn't stop. It was almost drawing me to her. Each stitch that I put in was almost a connection there, and I just couldn't explain it. And then when you told me more about it, I totally understood and wanted to do more.
Yeah, I think that these little girls, they grab you in such a way and they speak to you through their needlework. And when you study their needlework in such close detail, you really get to know them. And we were just so lucky that Louisa's story was there for us. And when the orphanage sent through the records, and I'd seen that Louisa had been sent home from the orphanage because she couldn't go on to study, domestic science to get a job, I thought the next thing that I would be finding was her death record. And it was just so lovely to find out that she did go on and she did live a long life. Yes, she lost her children, which is a dreadful thing, but she did live a long life, and she was also quite comfortably off. They owned their own house when they died. Her will was probated, so she did have, belongings to leave. So that was really, really nice. One of the lovely things about Louisa's sampler to me is this little heart, and there's a stitch missing out of the heart. And I always wondered, and it is only wondered, it's probably just in my mind, if that missing stitch was her parents or her brothers that were missing out of her life. Anyway, it means a lot to me, that little heart.
I think it's a good interpretation of that.
Yes,
definitely.
Yeah. So Jackie is a very prolific stitcher, and it's not just Louise that she's stitched 4 hats. She's actually stitched a total of 4 samplers for us. Your next sampler was Mary Lee. Now, Mary Lee was a very, very special sampler for hats because it is the 2017 stitch along for the Attic Needleworks, and the model is actually in Arizona. So if you go to the Attic, please look and see Mary's sampler. It is absolutely stunning. She's a big girl, isn't she? What was the stitch count on her? 373 stitches by 445 stitches, and I think you loved every stitch.
Absolutely everything about it.
Yeah. So that was your second sampler, and by this time you were totally hooked on samplers.
I wanted more.
And the third sampler that Jackie did for hats was Mary Brown, and Mary Brown is a sampler that has the Lord's Prayer, and I don't think that you have to be religious to have heard of the
Not
Lord's
at all.
Prayer.
Everybody knows it.
Everybody knows the Lord's Prayer. And the colours on Mary Brown, they're so vibrant. Even though she was stitched in 1765, the sampler has just come down through the centuries in such lovely condition.
That's what I liked about it, to be honest, the colours.
The colours, really beautiful. There she is. We can't show the model for this one because she's also at the attic. Jackie's building up a great big collection at Attic Needleworks, and we're very proud to have our work displayed there. Then the last sampler that you finished was Eliza Skelton, which is a very sweet sampler. It has this beautiful rocking horse on it, which makes it ideal for an heirloom sampler to stitch for a child. Yeah. Now, Jackie has a daughter, Hannah, and I think that with this sampler that Eliza stitched this with the help of her mother, and she actually records that on the sampler. So maybe one day you'll get Hannah stitching with you.
Maybe.
Because Hannah's doing a fine art degree.
That's correct.
And you're doing a degree course. Tell us about that.
I'm going to do, starting September,
Yeah.
I'm going to do fabric design with an added twist. I'm going to study stitching within that, so it's going to be really exciting.
Yes, that's lovely. And you're going to use one of the hat samplers?
I am.
Yes.
That's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to do that.
Yeah, we've been looking at samplers today for Jackie to choose, which is going to be her next sampler, which is going to be incorporated into your university degree.
It is, yeah.
Yes,
it's going to be really exciting.
Yes, yeah. Jackie's actually working on another sampler, which you're getting very, very close to finishing, and we're expecting that to be our next release. It's a very beautiful
say
sampler.
what's in it?
You can. You can
Okay.
give a few little hints.
There's some freehand,
Yes.
really pretty freehand,
Yes.
and it's very beautiful.
It is very feminine.
Very.
Very pretty.
It's very different to what I've stitched already.
Yeah.
More neutered colours,
Yes.
but very pretty.
Very, very pretty. So that's going to be the hat's next release. So watch this space. The other exciting thing about that sampler is that it's a Cornish sampler, and I live in Cornwall.
Yep.
So
Special.
it's a special sampler. So there we are. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to us today, and it's really nice that you can meet Jackie. So until the next time.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.